On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to be talking about the power of the air and UFO sightings over Israel. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me this strange phenomenon.
Strange indeed, J.R. And you know, the UFO phenomenon is one that we've touched on from time to time over the years because it is tied to prophecy. I believe, and a number of other Christian writers believe, that the demons, the power of the air, are those creatures that cause this manifestation we've come to call UFOs. Now, we know that there are both angels and demons, but the demons seem to be doing their worst these days. They seem to be coming out of the closet, so to speak, and there are just numbers of UFO sightings today, even though you don't see them in the news, because there's almost a news blackout on the subject of UFOs. Nevertheless, they're coming back stronger than ever.
We have published Gary's article on the power of the air in our August edition of Prophecy in the News magazine. And on the front cover, we put a picture of Mercury. According to Greek mythology, Mercury was a Spartan. He was born in Peloponnesus in the southern islands of Greece. And he bears the insignia of the tribe of Dan, the wings, the eagle's wings on the helmet and the feet, and on the caduceus, the wings, and then the coiled serpents. Two serpents listed, shown here, coiled together. Now, these are the symbols of the ancient tribe of Dan. In fact, the Spartans called themselves Danaans, according to Homer's Iliad, and one of their first kings was a fellow named Danaus. I don't know, we cannot prove that their connection is with the ancient tribe of Dan, but the rabbis have written that Dan would produce the Antichrist. So it's kind of interesting that we have this swift God who moves quickly through the heavens, and that he should be associated with UFOs. Tell us about some of the UFOs that have been sighted in Israel.
Well, we've had some sightings recently of over Tel Aviv and over at Israeli Air Force Base, for example. There's a place in Israel called Kochav Yair where an Israeli F-15 was literally videotaped in hot pursuit of a flying disc, and that's on videotape. Around Tel Aviv, they're being photographed by people with video cams. Up around the northern provinces, Galilee has been the site of a lot of sightings. Haifa, off the coast of Haifa, there have been some sightings, and in the kibbutz Hatzor, they have photographed what they call a flying balcony, of all things, a kind of a glowing orange rectangular curious-looking craft that had a railing around the front of it, and some personages of some sort were seen standing behind that railing, looking down at the people who were watching them. So there have just been numbers of sightings all over Israel.
It's interesting to me that UFO flaps have increased during the years of Israel's wars with the Arabs. 1948, there was a UFO flap. Of course, you remember the Roswell incident. And following that, the Lubbock Lights and others in the early 50s. 1956 was a special time of UFO sightings around the world.
Yes, it was.
And in 1967, this was another six-day war, this time in Israel. And in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, there were sightings. And there were stories that came out of both of those wars about soldiers dressed in white helping the Israelis fight against the enemy. And the enemy fled when they saw these things because it just spooked them.
And I believe that the angels do help out. We've numbers of stories about the angelic presences during the wars of Israel.
Well, Gary, let me mention that if the UFOs are being sighted this year in Israel, there may be another war upcoming pretty soon.
History would seem to say this. You know, Christian commentators, and we're not the only ones who've made this observation, have noted that if UFOs are manifestations of evil power, that is, they are demons or fallen angels under the control of Satan, and if they are they come out in special numbers when Israel is imperiled, then what we're seeing today is a stirring of the demons. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a very unclean phenomenon from God's point of view, and we're going to be discussing it on that level. Satan is called the god of this world. in 2 Corinthians 4:4, and it says there that he has blinded the minds of the unbelieving. That is to say, he convinces them that he's not who he really is. Jesus called him the prince of this world, and he is slated for judgment. Now, J.R., if he's called the prince of this world, that means that he's the inheritor of this world.
And Paul, writing to Ephesus, he said in Ephesians 2:2 and 3, wherein in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, from which we get the title of your article here in our magazine, The Power of the Air.
Power of the air.
If he's a prince, then we need to look at why he is a prince and what is the history behind all of this. Give us some kind of something to hang our hats on here.
Well, many people have wondered, J.R., just exactly what Satan's status is. We know that he is the, shall we say, he's the heir of planet Earth, the rightful heir in a regal or royal sense, because he has the full run of this place. And he's called the Prince of the Power of the Air. And the title Prince means that he is the inheritor. Therefore, he was scheduled to inherit.
Not the king now, just the prince, which means that he is in line to receive it someday.
He's in line to receive it someday, but the common belief is that he squandered his inheritance in sin. When he fell, he said, I will be like the Most High. The earth and its environs were not enough for him. He wanted the whole thing. And so he squandered the inheritance. And theologically, then we come to a number of questions. The creation of humanity, Adam and Eve, seems to have been done on the basis that God wanted to replace the sinner, Satan, with another line that would inherit the world. And out of this man and woman and all their progeny would come the Messiah, who turned out, of course, to be the Lord Jesus Christ.
Now, in the Garden of Eden, God said when he created Adam, Adam, you can have dominion over the earth.
That's right.
So we're talking about God here giving what once was to be received as an inheritance by Lucifer, who squandered his inheritance, and Adam comes along. God makes Adam and gives him that inheritance instead. So when the devil found out about it, he didn't like the idea that God had made a garden on this earth and put a couple of people in there to take his place.
Usurpers is the way he would have looked at them, and he came along and God allowed him to test this new couple. Now we know that the new couple failed the test. They were subverted, but as part of God's huge plan of the ages, that failure did not mean that God's purpose was foiled, because out of this fall came the prophecy of Genesis 3:16, namely the prophecy of the seed of the woman, who would be the Messiah, who would then rise up to receive the inheritance.
And bruise the head of the serpent.
That's right.
Head meaning his power, his seat of authority, his princeship, his kingship.
That's right.
Jesus then is going to destroy the kingdom of the dragon.
That's correct. And J.R., what we've got here is nothing more or less than celestial warfare. We've got the battle of the heavens that's been raging ever since. We have Satan and his angels. We have God and his angels, and they've been clashing in the skies over this planet, I think, ever since that day.
Well, I've got to ask you, Gary, do we have different species of demonic and fallen angel-like creatures? They don't all look alike. They're not all the same size. They don't all weigh the same. They don't. Are there different nationalities of these creatures?
Well, you know, it's interesting you should mention that, and we're drawing near to a break. We can't totally answer it before we take a break. But the science fiction movies always picture all the, as you say, different nationalities of aliens. The Bible, strangely, reflects this idea, because the Bible talks about at least 3 levels of fallen beings: principalities, powers, and rulers of darkness. And I believe we're talking about principalities being fallen angels, powers being designated authorities, a lower order of fallen angel, and then rulers of darkness being the demonic hordes that just fly all around the earth doing all the mischief they can. And therefore I do believe we have different, if you will, species of creatures.
In the past, we have had stories of fairies and stories of little people.
Sure.
We'll talk about that when we come back, so don't go away. We've got a special message just for you, and we'll return in just a moment. Depending upon the generation that is living upon the earth at that time, these demonic creatures are described in various means. Well, we have stories of fairies and leprechauns and little people and gnomes. Would you say that these are demonic manifestations to a particular generation of people?
Absolutely. Each generation seems to be presented with what it will believe, and of course we live in the space generation, and so the demonic forces are presenting themselves as space aliens, which is perfectly acceptable to this generation. Always before, they've been little gnomes, you know, and little leprechauns and things. And yet the Bible refers to them as the prince of the power of the air. Now that word air in Greek refers to the atmospheric heavens, but we also know that Satan controls the system of the material universe. The idea of the God of this world means literally the God of this age. And J.R., we live in a ravaged universe. It used to be thought by the old physicists and mathematicians that the universe was perfect, like a clockwork. But the better our telescopes get, the more we can see that we have worlds in collision. We have asteroids colliding with planets. We have the moon pockmarked with millions of craters. Mars is racked, and Mars used to have an atmosphere and had water running in rivers, and that atmosphere has been blown away. Something terribly catastrophic seems to have happened. And I think all of this was timed with the fall of Satan. The prince, when he fell, when he squandered his inheritance, he ruined this creation, and it has yet to be repaired.
And Jesus is the one who's going to fix it all up.
Absolutely.
When we get to Revelation chapter 4, we see God sitting upon a throne in heaven. The time of his judgment has come. He has a scroll in his hand. Theologians have called this scroll the title deed to planet Earth, squandered by the prince, Lucifer, and ruined by Adam's sin, to be redeemed by Jesus Christ. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's the blessed hope.
And you know, the Bible is very clear. It talks about these fallen angels as having been imprisoned in Tartarus, the deepest pits of hell, awaiting judgment. And these are the angels that left their first estate and corrupted man back in the days of Noah. But a lot of ancient sources refer to these fallen angels, J.R., as like demigods. The Greeks thought of them as gods. For example, Satan in the Chaldean is shaitan. And if you change the S to a T, which is perfectly permissible in transliteration, you get the Greek Titan. And Titan, of course, was another name for Zeus. And so you have people like Zeus and Apollo and all of these pagan gods of the old days. For example, Apollo was associated with the sun, and his realm was the sun. And he was actually known as the god who drove his chariot in the environs of the sun. We have then these ancient myths that seem to come down to us in the current UFO phenomenon. That is, these old gods are trying to make an appearance once again.
Now, the interesting thing about these ancient pagan religions is that they all appear to be the same. They're the worship of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And to each of these was ascribed a particular personage or personality.
Sure.
In Egypt, it was Ra, the sun god.
Sun god.
And in Mesopotamia, it was Baal. Ashtaroth was the moon goddess.
Right.
Then she became Ishtar in Egypt, and Athena, and other names in Greek and Roman mythology. But you know, these creatures could not just be figments of men's imagination. Perhaps they existed at one time in the form of aliens who came down to dabble in men's affairs.
And it's what the Bible says, that they're called the angels who left their first estate. They were supposed to stay in heaven, but they decided to come and corrupt humanity.
Now, Gary, what about this fellow named Apollo?
Well, I was going to get to that because that's really interesting, J.R. We have in Revelation 9:11 the opening of the bottomless pit, and we know that there are angels trapped down there awaiting judgment. And we read this, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. Now, Apollyon, if you just take off the I-O-N ending on that, it's Apollo, and the very name associated with the ancient sun god. And the Bible says, and I believe the Bible literally, that this Apollo is to be released during the Great Tribulation, and he is going to cause...
You think he's the same person?
It's very possible.
The Greeks worshipped?
Can't be dogmatic about it, but I think he may be the same person.
Oh, fascinating possibility there.
Yeah, that's right.
What about the dark bureaucracy you've written about here? Well,
the dark bureaucracy is kind of interesting, because if you read in Ephesians 6:11 and 12, which urges us to put on the whole armor of God, and it says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." The word for principalities here is archon. Now, an archon is a high angel. This would be a fallen angel. The word for powers is delegated authorities, and these would correspond with the angelic host who fell with the archangels. And finally, we have rulers of the heavens, and these would be what the Greeks called daimonia, demons. And J.R., I believe that all of these powers are wrestling back and forth, and almost in preparation for the final battle, which is pictured in Revelation, between Michael and the devil.
If there are UFOs being sighted over Israel right now, is it possible then that this great battle is about to commence?
J.R., I think it's very possible that the great battle is being prepared. I think that everything we've seen, and there's much, much more in this article that we don't have time to talk about, but do you know that there are actually phenomena called atmospheric guns? And these are heard particularly over pagan countries. For example, in Barisal in India, Bengal province. There are what are called the Barisal guns. You can stand there, this has been going on now for 2 centuries at least, and you can hear guns firing in clear air overhead, as though there's some battle being waged in the heavens. And this is a recorded phenomenon. In fact, it's been recorded in the British magazine Nature, which is a very prestigious scientific journal, and no one knows what's making those so-called Barisal guns, but I've got an idea that it's that heavenly battle that's raging.
On our next program, we're going to be talking about the mystery of the fallen angels, and we're going to be using the scriptures, the spirits in prison, and we'll be talking about these spirits in prison. In Jude chapter 6, by the way, Gary, we have a mandate, divine mandate for those who have committed this horrible wrong.
Yes, we do. In fact, in Jude 6, those angels have been locked away. They're awaiting judgment simply because it says they left their first estate.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the months ahead, because we're approaching the end of this millennium, just a few months away from January 1, the year 2000. A number of things are happening in the way of occults, the occultic, the New Age movement. There are various ceremonies going on right now, and it's many things are associated with the Great Pyramid of Giza. And Gary, tell us about some of those things that are in the offing.
Well, yeah, and just ahead, December 31st, 1999, they're scheduled to install a gold pinnacle on the Great Pyramid of Giza, and they're scheduled to have an occult ceremony within the pyramid. Of course, we'll be looking into this. You can depend on it. Occultism in all forms. And one of the manifestations of occultism is UFO sightings. And JR, they're all over the world right now, not just Israel. Even Los Angeles, Chicago, they've been seen, major metropolitan areas. You could say that we're in the midst of a UFO wave right now.
Mm. You know, I haven't been able to confirm the things that we're hearing, some of the rumors we're reading right now, but one particular rumor says that this pinnacle that they're going to put on top of the pyramid is the capstone, and that this capstone will have the Eye of Horus on each of the four sides. And yes. That's what's on our dollar bills, you know. This is going to be an interesting sight. George Bush is going to be there. I've heard him say years ago that he was going to be there. Well, we'll be back in just a moment.